in the first 60 years of the 20th century. My story begins, here he is, in his mayoral robes in the late 50s, here in Pembroke. My story begins in the year 1894, the month of March. Queen Victoria is on the throne. William Ewart Gladstone leaves office as Prime Minister for the last time in March. And also in March, my grandfather, William Thomas Nevin, was born. Not here in Pembroke Dock, where he spent most of his life, but in the great city of Manchester. So his father was a man called Thomas Nevin, who was born in County Roscommon in Ireland in January 1854. He joined the British Army as a drummer boy at the age of 12. And he then married a young Irish girl called Honora Mullins in 1878. This is a copy of their marriage certificate in the district of Pembroke. They had 9 children altogether. Certainly 2 of them, probably 3, died in infancy. 5 survived until adulthood, including William. After leaving the army, Thomas Nevin acquired the lease of a public house in Manchester with his army gratuity and whatever savings he managed to accumulate during that time. And that was where William was born. In 1904, their youngest child, Morris, died at the age of 5. And it was after that, he died in Manchester, and the family then seems to have moved out here to Pembroke Dock, where Thomas had served at the Clanion Barracks during his career. And my grandfather completed his education here in Pembroke Dock. He left school at the age of 12, the statutory age of school leaving at that time, and took up work in the Royal Naval Dockyards. And it was about this time he made the acquaintance of this young lady. This is my grandmother, Mary Helen Fay. She was also the daughter of an Irish professional soldier called Edward Fay. Edward Fay served the Royal Horse Artillery. And in the 1890s, they were posted to India. That was where my grandmother was born. She was born in Chennai in 1895. Not long after that, his regiment was deployed to South Africa, where there was a war brewing. And they were engaged in the Battle of Ladysmith, which was a setback for the British forces. They had to fall back on the town of Ladysmith. It was besieged for 4 months. Many more men died of dysentery and typhoid during the siege. Eventually, on St. David's Day 1900, a relief column came up from the Cape and they were relieved. But Edward Fay was no longer fit for military service after that. He also demobilised here in Pembroke Dock. But in 1914, a far greater conflict broke out, the First World War. My grandfather then signed up immediately with the 11th Welsh Regiment. These were the famous Cardiff Pals or Cardiff Boys. They were deployed initially on the Eastern Front in the Balkan Theatre. And this is my first memento. This is his Christmas tin from Christmas in 1914. It's quite a simple tin. It's not of any great monetary value. You can pick these up on eBay for a few pounds, but it was a sufficient value to my grandfather that he kept it for the rest of his life. And I think it's to remind him of that time, and also perhaps of some of his comrades in arms who, like him, did not make it home. And he almost suffered their fate. In 1916, by now he was deployed on the Western Front on the Somme, and he engaged in the Battle of the Ridges and was reported missing for several hours. He was found very badly gassed in critical condition, very lucky to live. He was hospitalised for several months thereafter. And he had no idea what had happened to him when he came round. This is a family photograph from 1917. You've got Thomas Nevin there with his pipe, father. I think that is William's older brother, also called Thomas Nevin Jr. And there are a couple of other family members also in uniform. William isn't there. That's his mother there, Nora. I think it's taken on the occasion of a birthday of a grandchild. He's not there because I think he was in hospital at the time. But I think in taking this photo, Thomas Nevin was making a statement that despite the mortal threat that faced individual members of the family itself, like the nation, would endure and it would survive the war, which indeed it did. And after he got out of hospital, my grandfather married almost immediately to my grandmother, the war over, he went back to his job at the Royal Naval Dockyard down the road here, and they started a family. So the oldest child was Gertrude Doreen, my Auntie Doreen. She was born in Pembroke Dock in October 1918. Then Eileen Mary, born in 1920, and my cousin Mary is here, her daughter, who's hopefully helping with the lights. Then the oldest son, William Bernard, my Uncle Bernie, born in 1921, and finally my own father, Edward Thomas. He was also born here in Pembroke Dock in 1925. So everything's going quite well. They've acquired a family home, small house in Upper Merrick Street, secure employment with the Royal Naval Dockyard, growing family. Then disaster struck. Disaster struck in the form of the closure of the Royal Naval Dockyard in 1926. And that affected hundreds of families in Pembroke Dock. Because the main breadwinner was then thrown out of work. How do you survive? Well, if you're a young man down on your luck in the middle of a big economic depression, you need to put bread on the table for your family. You're not too fussy about what kind of job you take up. So my grandfather at one point worked on the dust carts here in Pembroke Dock. There was another way I think the family survived, and this comes from a 1928 photo. This is a golden wedding there of Thomas Nevin, his father, and Nora, his mother. Family members there, that's my father, right at the front, and other family members. They'd been married 50 years. Now, Thomas Nevin was a child of the Great Famine. This was the very difficult period in Ireland when 1 million lives were claimed by starvation in the 1840s and 1850s by the failure of successive potato harvests. And it seems inconceivable that he wouldn't have done anything he could in his power to ensure his own children and grandchildren didn't suffer the same fate. So I would surmise that he also lent financial support to them during these difficult times. This is another photo of the same day. This is a day out at Freshwater West Beach in 1928 to celebrate the Golden Wedding. Again, the family patriarch and matriarch, they're there. The grandchildren in the front row. Various other members of the extended family around. This is the 1920s, as you can see from the clothes. But it isn't the Roaring Twenties, it isn't the Jazz Age, it isn't the Great Gatsby. It's a rather grimmer picture. There's no one there smiling. It doesn't look like a great fun day out to me. They were simply surviving through what was in Pembroke Dock a very severe depression. However, things began to look up in 1930. William gains a job with the Ministry of Works. This is a photo of the family from the early 30s. There's a grandmother, Nora. She passed away in 1934. So I would date this photo about 1931-32. There's my grandfather, looking quite dapper, with a Panama hat. My grandmother, smiling happily. Uncle Bernie, with his grandmother's hands on his shoulders. My father, Auntie Eileen, Auntie Doreen. So it's a much happier family photo. The father is back in work and earning a good living. Similarly, I think from the mid-30s, in the back garden of their home in Merrick Street, Upper Merrick Street, Auntie Eileen takes pride of place. There's my father next to her, Uncle Bernie, Auntie Doreen. This is the back garden of their home in Merrick Street. Again, you can see everyone's quite happy. I don't know, but I suspect it may have been taken on Auntie Eileen's 16th birthday, because she looks about that age, and that would be consistent with the age that my father looks. However, as we know, this period of peace and comparative tranquility is soon to come to an end. September 1939, the Second World War breaks out. Now, Pembroke Dock has a unique honour of being the only town in Britain at that time to whom all three of the armed services. Royal Navy, obviously. The Army had the Clanyon Defensible Barracks, partly to protect the Royal Navy, and the youngest branch, the Royal Air Force, they had arrived here in the late 20s. However, the fact it was home to all three services also meant it was a prime target for Luftwaffe. And in 1940 and 1941, Pembroke Dock was subject to a sustained blitz. It was the most heavily bombed town in relation to its population in the whole of Great Britain. And most of Britain's anti-aircraft defences, such as they were concentrated in the southeast to protect London, quite understandably, because that was the capital. But Pembroke Dock was left more or less defenceless. So the bombers came over night after night, very soft target for the Luftwaffe, and it must have been quite a terrifying ordeal for William Nevin and his family, huddled in their cellar in Upper Pembroke Street, not knowing whether one of the bombs had their name on it. Well, fortunately it didn't, otherwise some of us wouldn't be here today. However, the Luftwaffe did score a couple of successes. In August 1940, the Clanreath oil tanks were hit, and 33 million tonnes of oil were spilled. It was a huge fire, the greatest conflagration seen in Britain since the Great Fire of London in 1666. It took 3 weeks to put it out. Firemen were brought in from the whole of Wales to try and counter the blaze. 5 Cardiff firemen lost their lives. Many more firemen very seriously injured with the hot oil that got on their skin and in their eyes. And while that fire was still blazing, where we are now was also hit in September 1940 by a bomb. This wasn't the Pate Hall at that time, it was the Temperance Hall, which was a previous community centre. That's the Temperance Hall. You can see it as it looked in the 1920s, I think, in Diamond. This is a view down Diamond Street. So that's the Temperance Hall there. This is where we are today, where we're sitting. And you can see it looks slightly chapel-like, but that was the main community centre. That was in the 1920s. September 1940, that's what it looked like. There was a direct hit on the building. There was no money to restore it during the war, so it remained a shell, and in fact by 1945 it was no more than the ruin because there'd been no money to restore it. So that was all that was left of the old Temperance Hall. However, little by little, the Allies began to swing the course of the war in their favour. Pembroke Dock played a key role in that. Pembroke Dock was the base for the flying boats, the Sunderlands. In the Battle of the Atlantic, after May 1941, after the Bismarck was sunk, the German Naval Command were increasingly reluctant to expose their surface battleships to the Royal Navy in the North Atlantic, because they knew they'd be destroyed. So they reverted instead to U-boat warfare, using their submarines to torpedo the convoys that were carrying vital supplies from America to Britain. And initially they were quite successful, and it really posed a threat to Britain's survival. The flying boats operated as patrol bombers. They were there to identify where the U-boats were, to give intelligence to the Royal Navy, also to drop bombs on them and hopefully disrupt and destroy them, and also to pick up sailors who'd been shipwrecked by U-boat attacks. And in May 1943 was the key month. A quarter of the entire U-boat fleet was destroyed in a single month, and after that the Battle of the Atlantic effectively was won. And when the Battle of the Atlantic won, the Second World War was also won. It went on for another 2 years, but effectively that was the beginning of the end for the German effort. 1945, with his children now demobilising from the armed services, they're growing up, they're embarking on their own careers, William Nevin has more time to concentrate on community affairs, and he is elected as councillor for the Pate Ward, which is the area of Pembroke Dock we're now in 1945. In the mid-50s he retired from the civil service, and this is the medal he was given then, which was passed down to me. It's the Imperial Services Medal, awarded for 25 years of meritorious service to clerical grade civil servants in bodies like the Post Office and the Royal Dockyards. So once he retired, he obviously could then concentrate full time on being a councillor. He becomes an alderman, and in 1957 becomes the 575th Mayor of Pembroke Dock. And here I've put it propping up this so it's not skew with. I'm very grateful to Mary's son Sean. He produced this book, William Nevin, 575th Mayor of Pembroke. It's the whole borough of Pembroke at that time, both the town and the dock, 1957-58. It's not a conventional biography. What it is it's a series of letters, official invitations, press reports, things of that nature, covering his year in office. And it was collected by him and my grandmother just so they could remember the time that they served as mayor and mayoress. And a couple of things come out of this. This is the official invite to celebrate his election, 22nd of May 1957. followed by lunch at the drill hall, because of course then the paper hall didn't exist. There was no community centre, the drill hall was where it took place. First thing that leapt out to me, life was a lot simpler then. This is a big official luncheon, but you can see the menu there by today's standards, quite basic. You know, food wasn't as plentiful, there wasn't as much choice, money was scarcer. Nevertheless, I think they enjoyed it all. After the meal, you have the toast, starting with the toast to Her Majesty, and then the outgoing mayor, Alderman William of Council for Pembroke Ward, he hands over the chain of office to my grandfather. And the second thing that comes out is there's quite a high degree of courtesy and respect in public discourse back in the 50s, which doesn't always apply today. For example, Alderman William, whom I suspect was not of the same political persuasion as my grandfather, don't know, but his speech or his toast is quite fulsome. He says, and I quote in a contemporary newspaper report, "I've always found the mayor to be a very loyal colleague, and loyalty in public life is an invaluable asset. Alderman Nevin enters fully into team spirit and is always prepared to cooperate wholeheartedly in all efforts to promote the betterment of Pembroke and Pembroke Dock. Mean and petty intrigues are completely foreign to his nature." So one might be tempted to observe he might not do very well in politics today then. Then the senior alderman for the Pater Ward, who I think was a political ally, Alderman Monroe, he's quoted in the same article saying, "Alderman Nevin is a son of the borough and has spent the whole of his lifetime here, except the period during the First World War, when he fought in defence of his country in the Balkans and in France. All of his children followed the example of their father by doing some form of national service during the 1939 to 45 war." And referring to his work on the council, Alderman Monroe said that under his chairmanship of the Pater Ward Lighting Committee, Pembroke Dock had become one of the best lighted towns in the country, and you can still see the results of that period of his career in the street lighting we have here today. So after the lunch, opportunity for some family photos. Here's one of the new mayor and mayoress with my father, my brother Paul, my sisters Tessa and Mary. Now at this point, you're no doubt wondering what I was doing while my grandfather served as borough mayor. Well, actually you're probably not wondering that at all, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So in Sean's book, we discover this news cutting from June 1957. "Sailed for Jamaica. Dr. Edward Nevin, son of the mayor and mayoress, sailed from Liverpool on Tuesday to take up his new appointment as head of the External Finance Division of Jamaica's Ministry of Finance. Dr. Nevin, who is accompanied by his wife and children, has been seconded from his post as lecturer of economics at the University College of Wales, Aberystwyth. They are voyaging on luxury liner Reina del Pacifico, which called in at Milford Haven some time ago for repairs shortly after she had made world height lines by running onto a coral reef during a world cruise." So that was a bit of reassuring intelligence for us. So with those words of encouragement, we set sail for the West Indies. Now, it may be worth saying a few words about the role of the mayoress, my grandmother. The mayor's role is both political and ceremonial. My grandmother obviously didn't play any political role, though giving my grandfather some moral support, but it's fair to say she entered into the ceremonial functions fulsomely, indeed with some considerable enthusiasm and gusto. Starting with the mayoral ball, this is in the evening of Wednesday, 22nd of May. This is the invite from 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. Here we see her with my grandfather dancing like fantastic. Another photo from the same evening. This is that's my Uncle Bernie looking very dashing in a dinner jacket. His wife, my Auntie Yvonne, she's also looking very elegant. Their children, Angela and David, and between them another cousin, Moira, who's the daughter of my Auntie Doreen. So that's the evening of the mayoral ball. It may be worth we don't have time to give a full account of the social calendar of Lady Mayoress during that year. But just to get a flavour of the sort of social engagements they had. Thursday, May the 23rd. Hopefully having fully recovered from the previous evening's festivities, the Mayor and Mayoress are cordially invited to luncheon by the Mayor-elect of Haverfordwest to foster cordial cross-borough relations. Friday, May 31st, dinner with the Pembroke Harlequins Rugby Football Club. Sunday, June the 2nd, Civic Sunday. Friday, June 17th, attendance at a local school sports day. Then in mid-June, here we are, the Mayor greets the new regiment arriving at the Canyon Defensible Barracks. Quote, an old soldier receives a salute. Friday, June 27th, Midsummer's Ball, and most importantly, July the 18th, they're off to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen. And I'm sure Her Majesty that morning, full of the joys of life, leapt out of bed saying, it's great, singing, oh what a beautiful morning, this is the day I'm going to meet Alderman and Mrs. W. Nevin of Pembroke Borough. In fairness, there were just a few other people at the garden party that day, 800 to be precise. Nevertheless, I think for my grandmother it was a highlight of the year. Then, rushing straight on to why we're here today, the official opening of here, the Pater Hall, December the 11th, 1957. This is the invite and the programme. It opens with a presentation of the key by the architect who designed it, Major Alan G. Brace. Then the formal opening of the doors of the hall. Then the unveiling of the plaque, which is still here today. Then the assembled companies take their seats in the main hall, which is just behind us. Addressed by the Mayor, presentation of a bouquet, vote of thanks, and tour of inspection. So, this is the key that there's Major Brace, the architect, and there's my grandfather. And here's the very key, the Pater Hall key that he was given that day. Very generously lent to me by my cousin Dawn for the occasion, very precious family heirloom to us. Here it is in full. It has on it, presented to His Worship the Mayor, Alderman W. Nevin, on the official opening of the Pater Hall. And here, I was hoping actually this might prove to be the key to the drinks cabinet. However, this is the second photo, second point in the programme. This is my grandfather using the key to open the door to the hall. I don't know whether the news has leaked out to the trustees that I've now got the key, but I noticed the locks have been changed, so you can't use this to open it anymore. Then the third item, this is my grandmother. She's opening the plaque, which is still in the front entrance, but I think it's been moved. I think it was next to the front door then, and it's been moved the other side of the hall, but it's the same plaque that's there today. And that's it. It's the wording on it. It just reminds us that this hall was to replace the old Temperance Hall destroyed by enemy action on the 2nd of September 1940. So that's the plaque, and there we are today. So there's Pater Hall, where we are, on the site of the old Temperance Hall. Diamond Street with the street lamps, which also date from that era. And to me, all that's needed is a bit of tree planting, high quality street paving, which is already there, some high quality street furniture. That could be the most elegant and beautiful boulevard in the whole of Wales. But that's, maybe I'm a bit prejudiced in that regard. So the year goes on, this is towards the end. A couple of invites, one from the Archbishop of Westminster in May 1958, on the Friday, 2nd May. The day after, he is invited by the Right Honourable the Lord Mayor of Cardiff to luncheon on Saturday. That was to the occasion of the Festival of Wales in 1958. But all good things come to an end. I'm sure my grandmother would have stoically battled on with her civic duties. More luncheons, more balls, more dinners. But the time came when the garden parties were over, and the key then the mayoral chain then gets handed over to his successor, Alderman Colley. However, my grandfather's civic work wasn't finished. This is the watch I'm wearing today, which is passed down to me. Still keeps very good time. It was given to him on the occasion of the opening of the new cooperative food hall here in Diamond Street in August 1958. It still keeps very good time. It's also I'm not really worn it very much. It's saved for very special occasions, maybe about a dozen times since over the last 30 years, but has always brought me good luck. Not that I'm superstitious, I'm just saying it's coincidentally enough. And when he retired, local press coverage of his year in office was generally sympathetic. There's an article entitled "Alderman Nevin kept his promise, a job well done." That reported he has won the unsolicited admiration of all for his untiring efforts for the betterment, both socially and industrially, of his greatly loved borough. And went on to comment that when he took office, the immediate outlook looked bleak because there was the threat of, quote, darkening depression as the RAF base closed with the loss of jobs and spending power in the town, and recalled how he and his council colleagues travelled to London to lobby for the central government for more investment in the borough. Another article entitled "A Full and Happy Year in Office" concluded that many claim that Nevin has been the best mayor the borough has had for many years. He served the borough as well as any man can expect to serve it. The article continued, "There is no doubt that the alderman drew a lot of his strength from his mayoress. He was the first for many years, at least, who had the mayoress walking at his side at the annual mayoral Sunday. When questioned on the innovation, Alderman Nevin said, 'My wife accompanies me to church every other Sunday. Surely it is right and proper that she should be at my side on this important occasion.'" Again, it does seem a bit odd that, I don't regard my grandfather as a great feminist, but it's a bit odd that the mayoress wasn't involved in this every year. And he concluded, "Although a devout Roman Catholic and the first Pembroke mayor of that faith since Reformation, Alderman Nevin and Mrs. Nevin gave their support to and were welcomed at functions organised by many of the free churches of the borough." And then he continued his public service. He opened the cooperative food hall in August of that year. But my second last memory of him, actually, in March 1961, the last Sunderland flew into Pembroke Dock. And my grandfather and father and myself went down to Front Street to watch it, to see what was happening. And I can remember, well, I don't know, was anyone else, maybe I'm the only person who's still alive who can remember that. So it may be worth saying what happened, what the path of descent was of the last Sunderland. What happened was we were on Front Street with the Martello Tower on our left, Clydai Bridge on our right, and the three dots came out of the horizon on the right and descended. There was a Sunderland in the middle and two planes flanking it, which I since learned were a Shackleton and a Neptune, and they're about 300 feet above the Clydai Bridge as they descended, and they kept coming down until they were more or less directly in front of our eye line, and then the Shackleton and the Neptune broke off left and right, because of course, unlike the obsolete old Sunderland, they couldn't go any lower. They couldn't land on water. So as it landed on the water, it seemed to me it wasn't so much like an obsolete old warhorse, more or less ready for whatever the aeronautical equivalent of the Macca's yard is. But to me, to quote Tennyson, it seemed like a full-breasted swan fluting a wild carol ere its death one last time. And the last wild carol of the Sunderland then ended, its engines were cut, and its final journey was over. And as events transpired, 1961 was also the year when my grandfather's journey through life came to an end, because on December the 3rd, he suffered a massive heart attack at his home in Upper Merrick Street. He died at home. We at the time were living in Dublin, where my father had a post at the Irish Economic Research Institute. And when the news came through, I can remember, my father was quite a self-controlled man, not given to displays of emotion. But I could see he was quite shaken. Anyway, when he'd left to get the first flight back from Ireland to Wales for the funeral, I asked my mother what had happened. And she said, well, she thought my grandfather's heart had been weak ever since he'd been gassed on the Somme many years before. And perhaps the truth was that, not that we should be sad that he'd died, but happy that he'd lived as long as he had. And her account from 60 years ago was confirmed by an obituary notice that I came across. It's in Sean's book. It confirmed what she said. It said, only his closest friends realised there were times when the effects of the poisonous mist which rolled over the Flanders battlefield so many years before were with him still and causing him great distress. And the notes went on, he was proud of the council's achievements in bringing the town to a standard of illumination which bears comparison with any in the country. In view of his great work in this and other fields, the epitaph, "He strove for light," would not be inappropriate. And it finally noted that on the morning of his funeral, flags flew at half-mast at the Municipal Office, the British Legion Hall, and also the Trades and Labour Hall, quote, where Mr. Nevin was much respected for his work in the socialist cause and as chairman for many years of the local branch of the Transport and General Workers' Union. So, after the funeral, my grandmother rebuilt her life, and she survived, well, she outlived her husband 44 years, by almost 30 years. She worked latterly as a cook I think in the Coronation School, and I'm sure she discharged her duties there with the same conscientiousness that she discharged her duties as Lady Mayoress, because she was a very down-to-earth woman with very few pretensions. And she passed away in 1989, and she is buried alongside my grandfather at the Canyon Cemetery, where they rest in peace together to this day. So that draws this short tribute to the memory of my grandparents and to the people of Pembroke Dock to a close. And I'd like to just thank a few people. Firstly, the trustees of Pater Hall for the excellent work they're doing in maintaining the building to a very high standard for community benefit, and to Meg Burrell, who provided me with much valuable information on the history of Pembroke Dock. To my cousins Sean and Dawn, who supplied many of the photographs and memorabilia used in this talk. John Evans, trustee of the Sunderland Trust, he provided photos of the Temperance Hall, both before and after it was bombed, and of the official opening of the Pater Hall. And more widely, I'd like to thank all the trustees of the Pembroke Dock Heritage Trust, because when I was growing up, there was no heritage centre. It's quite a recent innovation, and they've done a magnificent job in preserving the town's heritage and raising awareness of the role it played during the nation's darkest hour, which is often overlooked, but it should be remembered, and remembered with honour. And what better memorial could there be than the return of the last Sunderland for permanent display here in Pembroke Dock, as indeed the citizens of the French Republic intended when they donated the last flying boat to Pembroke Dock, to the people of Pembroke Dock, in 1961. That was their salute for the role that the Pembroke Dock played in winning the Battle of the Atlantic, and the contribution they made to the liberation of France in 1944. So, a final word on my grandfather. He was, by all accounts, quite a humble man, a gentleman, in both the metaphorical and literal sense. And for more than 50 years, I think he sought, as best he could, to serve his family, his community, his country, to the best of his abilities. And if I was to just sum him up in one sentence, I would say only that he was a man who brought light to Pembroke Dock. And while that may be but a modest achievement, it's maybe not such a bad legacy to have left. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all. My grandfather's watch is telling me that I've used up the time allocated for this talk. I'd like to thank you all for your time and your kind and patient interest. And I'll open up the conversation to any comments or questions anyone may have. Thank you.